let's talk about Druid. Or rather, maybe not Druid. Let's talk about Shapeshift skills, or TaLiSMans, if you want to be the most appropriate. Is the Druid strong? Yes, it's very strong. It's got 3 different major archetypes: the wolf, the wyvern, and of course the bear, all with their own sort of distinct playstyle, all very fun, all very powerful. You can splice that in with, I suppose, a bit of plant watering if you like. To be honest, it seems pretty strong. It was strong in Act 1, but I never tested it much after that. So why do I not want to play my wyvern anymore after finishing the campaign on this character at level 61? Well, the wyvern is strong. There's no denying it. Look, even if you look at this crappy little level 15 rend, okay? It has a base damage effectiveness of 269% at level 15, which goes to 438% upon receiving the lightning buff, which, by the way, is 50% damage gained as extra lightning, so you might as well weapon swap this buff on pretty much every attack build for that matter. In addition to 150% more area of effect. Now what this tells me is Rend is obviously going to be our buff applying skill, our main sort of mob clearing skill. 150% AoE is gigantic. You combine that with the Herald and you've got a very good build already, just purely from this one skill. And it costs no mana, so you can go MOM if you want. Now if I want to go for something a bit more single target, I basically have my oil barrage. So from level 31, or whatever it is, from level 31 I get my oil barrage, I have my rend. That's my build. That's my character. My character is now done. I have my clear skill, I have my single target skill, I have my devour for a bit of power generation. I can also do the lingering illusions. And no matter how much I play this character, I mean I've done like one map, I just don't want to play anymore, but no matter how much I play with this character, that playstyle for now is going to remain the same. I'm going to be rending for single target, I'm going to be using my oil barrage. I will however add that there is arguably a little bit of cognitive bias when you look at the general sort of archetype of Druid skills, Shapeshift skills I should say, is that, well, unlike other skills where they're sort of, at least in the case of, let's say, bows, for example. Bows, you know, you have your lightning skills, your poison skills, whatever, you know, your ice skills, that type of thing. In reality, you're going to specialize into one of those, but they're all using a bow, so you just think I'm playing a bow character. Now, when you play a Shapeshift character, you have these 3 separate forms, but your mind will instinctively think they're almost separate builds, just purely by virtue of the fact that they've put you into a different form. A bear is visually different to the wyvern and plays different to a wyvern, yet they're all still part of the same primal skill umbrella. So if I'm going to be fair to DGG, they would have to triple the number of skills for this to feel in my mind the same way it would with a single weapon type. But anyway, people are going to play what they want to play, okay? They're going to want to play the wyvern, they're going to want to play a wolf because they think thematically it's a cool thing to do, and they want to pick a bear because they want to slam stuff and run around the map. However, that does have the consequence of making each one of these build archetypes seem a little bit like a MOBA character. You have a set cookie cutter way of executing the build with quite a large amount of restrictions that are a bit concerning to me, to be honest. I mean, let's look at Flame Breath, for example. I saw DM running this. It's obviously a very powerful skill, but in the future you would want to make this a main skill entirely by getting past the rage requirements, but you just can't whatsoever because it has this line saying cannot gain rage while using this skill. So GGG intends for us to use this entirely as like maybe a multi-boss encounter, or maybe you want to just do even more boss damage than you would do with Oil Barrage, but at the end of the day, this is going to be a limited skill, which does limit the upper ceiling of what we can do with the Wyvern, unfortunately. Maybe if we had a unique, so this could be, so the rage could constantly tick, this would be very cool. Because you have to admit, like, flying around the map as a wyvern, just holding Flame Breath all the time. By the way, this is terrible unless you're on WSD. Would be cool. Would be very, very cool. That would make me want to play. I mean, even the passive tree here, it's pretty good, but especially with some of these new Oracle nodes, they're actually really cool. We got some crit, we got some flat lightning, movement speed. This one gives 15 rage, which is very nice. But it's obvious that GGG wants us to... Well, GGG simultaneously wants us to use combination skills, but the passive tree also dictates that we're supposed to specialize at least to some extent, because, for example, if we look at the channeling nodes, which benefit to my knowledge, the wolf, sorry, not the wolf, they benefit the bear and the wyvern the most. Ideally, you'd want to spec onto these into some kind of weapon swap if you could. To be honest, you could do something really, really cute if you felt like it. You could make it so your oil barrage on the wyvern has some of these like wild channeling nodes, particularly the life recoup ones. You could maybe put a few points into defense with your 24 weapon points, and then you could do something very cool where you just have loads of recoup and a bit of extra damage while you're using your oil barrage, and then you go maybe for a bit more AoE because you don't need AoE at all with oil barrage, but you could use some more AoE when it comes down to using the rend. But anyway, we have nodes like this, clusters like this, where this is a lightning damage while shapeshifted, but as you can see, it's intended to be used for the wyvern, just based off the skill effect duration that you get and things like that. This one's obviously the bear one, this one's obviously the wolf one. So, I mean, these have an opportunity cost, right? All these points are particular opportunity costs that you need to mitigate by doing a combination of weapon swaps or specializing into one build. But at the end of the day, we do still need to specialize into one thing. So there's a little bit of the conflict of design here where there's an encouragement for a multi-skill playstyle, but the passive tree just doesn't quite allow it. You have some of these nodes here which are quite good early on spell damage and attack damage, but I mean, all the best spell nodes are kind of over here, right? So you're going to have a very, very restricted passive tree if that's the case. And there isn't really a directive incentive to do so when you can just be a bear and walk around with Walking Calamity. While we're on the topic of balance, does nobody else feel like the general balance in terms of characters and skills and the way you build a character in the game was best in 0.1? Because at least in 0.1 we had quite a variety of different, well, we had a gigantic variety of different skills we could use, and the game was much harder. Pretty much every build was, the DPS measurement was how quickly could you kill tier 4 Zesht, but you also needed to have a very good clear at the same time for the build to feel fun and powerful, but it was still a more strong reason to spec into single target damage. But I mean, even if I look back in 0.1, I played a Hex Blast build, and there were at least 3 very good versions. You had the Demon Form version, you had the Blood Mage version with a bit of crit and sometimes Burden of Shadows, and you had my Cheula version, which used Archmage and Plague Finger. 3 viable builds for one skill, and that one skill has been more or less deleted from the game since then. It's got some very niche use cases in bosses, and that's about it. We had all of Jungron's cast on crit stuff. That's pretty much gone almost entirely, at least in the way that it was originally. In fact, it got nerfed while he was playing. We're starting to see a lot more restrictions, and I don't know if GGG wants us to, if it's because GGG wants us to play in a very certain way, or whether it's just purely in their eyes they're just trying to design a more interesting combat system. But nevertheless, it does leave the question is, do we even need builds at this point? Can we just go for talent trees, like a WoW style 15 level talent system where we just pick our specialization from that point? Because I start to wonder, what's the point of having such a large tree, which, you know, it's such a large tree without any majorly build defining nodes aside from a few keystones and etc. But, you know, without things like masteries, it basically means that we have even less build diversity, ironically. GGG said they removed masteries because then it doesn't matter where you are on a tree. But the downside to that is, let's say if there was a mastery system here, and let's say I wanted to get, I don't know, let's say I really want to get some power from the lightning nodes over here, right? I could just spec over to maybe a lightning cluster in this area, get that, and I can save some points on the tree. But now if I want to specify more into lightning builds, particularly the thing which gives you 33% more wherever it's gone, this one, sorry, 33%. 30% extra. I basically have to start on this part of the tree. It's just far too unfeasible for me to go there. Yes, I could anoint, but this is just one example of a node, and I might want multiple. A lot of crit-based attack nodes are over here, for example. Similarly, a lot of stun threshold nodes are in this area. The tree feels a lot more restrictive. Us as players feel far more confined into just doing things that have already been predetermined by the game designers, which can have its own merits, but I don't think that is the beauty of what PoE can provide to people. In my opinion, this is very much a find a way to break our game simulator. People like breaking the game, and it feels fun to do so. But with the way PoE is going with some of its skill design, it's still relatively easy. Still relatively easy to break, to be honest. But you can't break it in any meaningful way. You can just make a generically strong build. Another concern I started to notice last league as well is lineage supports are fantastic, but what they really do is they lock too much build power behind whether you have them or not. Like, for example, let's say you're running some T15 maps. The DPS difference between you having Rakiata's Floor on an Elemental build and not is like, I don't know, 7x or something. It's gigantic, right? If you build into it. There's no item in most of the games like this where you can actually say that would give you a 7x damage increase. Maybe Archmage support in PoE 1, that would probably give you more, for example, but it's quite rare to do that, right? In my opinion, ARPG is the best when you have the sort of confluence of the passive tree, your character build archetype, and some very efficient interaction that you're working with. For example, maybe you find a cheap way to get projectile scaling, and then you can put the rest of your points into defense and just have like a nice, sturdy, high clear character. But with PoE 2 at the moment, it feels like your character is just, do you have the items, yes or no? Do you have the support gems, yes or no? In the case of Druid, are you level 31 or not? So you can use your clear skill and your predetermined bossing skill. Do you have these, yes or no? And that's pretty much that. And then you just get items to facilitate those. It does limit creativity. It does limit the ways in which we can break apart the game, which in my opinion is the most fun part. Some people prefer currency, but I think without both, the game might harm a bit. Or people just pick the most highly clearing build. So just sharing some of my thoughts, really. Usually I make one build per season, but with the Wyvern, I really don't see the points. Like, what can I really do with this build that would be different? Nothing. What can anyone do? Everyone's Wyvern build will be like 95% the same, and it'll just be a case of preference on what the differences are. You know, if you could remove the rage requirement from Flame Breath, then yes. I haven't tested too much with the Wolf. I started out the Bear. The Bear's fun. It's a bit clunky for my liking, but with these restrictions, what it effectively means is the sandbox, the playground, the universe in which we have to operate in is gradually shrinking until we all have more or less the same homogenized builds. Again, doesn't make the game less fun necessarily, doesn't make the characters less powerful, but it does hurt my personal enjoyment and the enjoyment of those that want to make builds because it just feels more restrictive, that's all. You know, it's like we go from playing with, let's say, an open canvas to playing with, let's say, some Lego kits with some instructions, you know. Less so much of a sandbox, more, here's what we think you'll like. But anyway, just sharing my thoughts. Have a good 0.4, everybody, and Merry Christmas.